Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Axelson from WordsthatKill.com. On my website I talk about many things like video games, I do reviews, I do analyses if you could call it that. I do write-ups for my D&D sessions. I am also the author of a homebrew supplement for the Genesis role-playing game system created by Fantasy Flight Games called Resident Evil Genesis. So I'm no stranger to Resident Evil. I just wanted to put that out there to get everyone on board with who I am and where this is coming from before we dive into the review. This is my first video review, and it's the first one I've ever read from a script. Usually I just write them up for my website, and it turns out I think I'm kind of bad at reading from a script. I feel a lot more natural just talking off the cuff, so apologies if I sound a little robotic. With all of that said, let's get into it. Resident Evil 2, a game people are probably going to end up talking about when discussing some of the best survival horror games of all time. Easily one of the best video games of all time as well. Originally released on the PlayStation 1 way back in January of 1998, when this game came out, I was only 4 years old. My earliest memory of Resident Evil 2 is actually about getting the game. My family went to this flea market kind of thing, but it was in this big building. It was kind of like a mall, but it was definitely some kind of vendor type deal where people were able to set up their own stalls and sell their own products, but in the actual storefronts of where these stores used to be in this old mall. It had 3 floors, though it was very big, and I was very young around this time. Resident Evil 2 had probably been out maybe a year or so, probably less, and so we'll say maybe 5 years old. I'm with my mom and I notice this guy selling video games, and I notice Resident Evil 2, and boy, look at that cover art. Even to this day I find it eye-catching. It just pulls you in. I mean, what is that even supposed to be? A zombie peeking out from behind a wall? That stylized font, especially the 2. I was young, but one thing was for sure, I wanted it. So I asked my mom if she would buy it for me, but the guy behind the counter pointed out the ESRB sticker on the front, indicating that this was a mature game not intended for children, so he would not sell it to my mom if she intended to purchase it for me. So my mom shooed me off, sending me over to my uncle and my dad doing something or other, and she tried to say something that even though I, the child, was the one who pointed it out to buy, she was buying it for the whole family since we all play games. But the guy said, "No, I know what you're doing, so I'm not letting you buy this game for your child." We ended up leaving there without a copy of Resident Evil 2, which was very disappointing, but I think we made our way over to a Funko Land near a house later on that night and bought a copy anyway, and those people certainly didn't care about selling this game to kids. But I was surprised to find that actually, as interested in getting the game as I was, and as dedicated in getting it for me as my family was as well, when I actually got the chance to play the game, my young as shit 5-year-old self was in for a rude awakening. Over the years, my experience with original Resident Evil would be tumultuous. Of me playing the game, not getting very far before getting absolutely terrified, and then shutting it off. In fact, an early memory I have of playing this game, the original Resident Evil 2, is me in the living room playing the game in broad daylight, all of our windows open, my mom doing stuff around the house, and my dad sitting on the couch watching me play the game. Literally the least scary environment you can imagine the game played in, and I made it all the way to one of the rooms in RPD, very early in the game mind you, where there's a bunch of police officer zombies walking around in an office room. Except I didn't know that. Instead, I walked into the room, the camera angle is pointing at the wall, which is covered in blood, and all I hear is coming from like 6 zombies. I immediately turned around and got the fuck out of that room as fast as my little hands could maneuver that controller, and my dad lost his shit. I had a habit of doing this when playing the game. I would make it only far enough to experience a new scary thing, then freak out and stop, only for my dad to laugh and then comment how I'm never going to finish it if I turn around and refuse to progress in any meaningful way. It's a game about zombies. Of course there's going to be zombies. Jesus. But unfortunately, with the way I was put together, I had a low tolerance for horror, and it just wasn't meant to be. That is, until now. One of the things that shocked me right away when I first started this game was the opening. While I could never bring myself to beat the original Resident Evil 2 because I was so scared of it at my young age, I could always get through the initial opening and make my way to RPD. It was then that I got too scared and had to put the game down. And later on I didn't have those games to play anymore. And so when the remake got here, I salivated at the idea of Raccoon City. I love urban zombies. I love the idea of you being out in this big city surrounded by tall buildings and long wide roads, yet you're so isolated and boxed in. That's the craving I was talking about earlier. The original opening of Resident Evil 2 sated that craving for me, even as a kid. The way the game just throws the controls to you, with the mangled car and semi-truck burning in the background. Everything's on fire, everything's destroyed, there's zombies everywhere. It's amazing. You have to figure out how to play the game and maneuver around these zombies, and you have to do it fast. Eventually you get to Robert Kendo, and it's a brief break in the tension as you're with another human being. But that tension is broken up almost immediately by zombies crashing through the window, and Kendo is Endo, and now you must be Gendo Agendo. It sets up this incredible sense of the unpredictable and makes you feel like you really can't let your guard down. But in the remake, it's kind of toothless. Every time you're out and about in the actual city itself, there's barely any zombies. I'm going to wager on this being because the zombies have a double lunge mechanic as well as a magnetic grab that they can grab you from very far away now, which means they have to lessen the amount of zombies compared to the original. I mean, you know, you play the original Resident Evil 2 and you see all of those zombies out there. Now imagine those guys could cover like 15 feet and grab you from like an additional 3 feet away, you know, in no time at all. Now, that doesn't sound very fun in these new mechanics, which in my opinion hurts the atmosphere of the game. And let's not forget that zombies can take up to 9 headshots to kill in the remake, and that's before they get back up again. The second you get control of the A scenario character in the remake, there's really not that much of a threat. And the intro sequence is much, much shorter now too. In the original, you actually had quite an adventure to get to the police station and had to avoid quite a few zombies. There's actually a really fun encounter in the A scenario near the basketball court where you get cornered by a small group of zombies in a tight corridor and have to fight your way out. Every single thing you do in the beginning of the original game is building tension and letting you know that these zombies mean business. In the remake, you just run into an alley, down some stairs, up some stairs, and there's the police station. There's not very many zombies. Some of them are basically set dressing that don't actually do anything, and it doesn't take very long at all to get to the police station. In fact, there's such a lack of urgency in this new remake, you can literally just stand around almost as soon as you run a few feet away from the initial zombies. Since zombies have some sort of binding keeping them to their zones, as soon as you walk a few feet away, they immediately turn around and stop following you. It immediately took away all of the tension out of the opening for me. All of this fire and carnage, the moaning howls of the horde of undead, and it lacks any teeth. They are just window dressing. Look how spooky we are, the game tells you. You sure are in danger. In fact, the only time the zombies managed to grab me is when I, the person who was supposed to be running for their life, went back towards the zombies, who had decided to stop chasing me immediately, by the way, and bumped into one accidentally and got bit. And that's on hardcore difficulty, by the way, and they still just stopped chasing you right away. It was incredibly disappointing. In the original game opening, you are hunted from the second you get control of the character, but here the zombies don't really seem to care much about you. The only thing I could think to compare this to is imagine if Konami stopped fucking things up with their gaming division and made a Metal Gear Solid remake. I'm talking full-on Fox engine, beautiful recreation, in a similar vein to the Resident Evil 2 remake. Imagine seeing Shadow Moses in the stunning new graphics of whatever new consoles are out. In this hypothetical future, it would probably be the next gen, so definitely PlayStation 5 and Xbox Woke or whatever the fuck. Imagine playing as Snake as he steps out into the near blizzard conditions as the cold cuts through him, and as he makes his way through the nuclear disposal facility, a genome soldier somewhere in the blizzard exclaims, "Footprints? Huh?" Who cares? Not my job. And nothing happens. As a lifelong Metal Gear Solid fan, that's kind of the same gut punch I'm feeling with the introduction of Resident Evil 2 Remake. Something so iconic and stunning, but remade without any of its teeth. Resident Evil 2 Remake is interesting. It manages to perfectly capture the feeling of the atmosphere that I have always wanted, I have always craved so desperately in a zombie game for just about my whole life. The feeling of walking down a dark and dingy hallway that's completely covered in blood and viscera, and there they shamble. A horde of undead, moaning that horrible undead moan as the pain of undeath fills them with rage. I actually really like how when you start the game for the first time, it opens with a setting to adjust the maximum brightness and minimum darkness. This setting is missing in a lot of horror games, and so it's either too dark or not dark enough. But with Resident Evil 2 Remake, I was able to perfectly calibrate exactly the look I wanted, where the darkness was just about pitch black. If it wasn't, I couldn't notice. The feeling of unease you experience as you walk through RPD is actually kind of incredible the first time through the game. In fact, it's actually kind of incredible every time through the game. They really nail the atmosphere. It feels right. It's perfect. When you walk by a window and hear a zombie start beating on it, moaning something horrible, it can actually be quite startling. I think I should reveal here that I didn't find the game to be all that scary. I was having too much fun to be scared, to be honest, though that doesn't mean I didn't feel an intense anxiety as I crept around the game, because I absolutely felt the tension of it. They did an incredible job setting that up, but gone are the days of me walking into a room, seeing blood on the wall and freaking out. I'm prepared for that life now. I will say, if there's anything this remake did perfectly, it's the atmosphere. The graphical beauty of this game has allowed the developers to truly capture the feeling they were going for. The atmosphere and tone of this game is incredible. All of the characters get a new interpretation in this game, some of which works well, some of which I'm not a fan of. Mostly I think it boils down to the writing, which is not very good. Interestingly, I find the relationship between Leon and Ada to be very interesting and fun. Ada, as franchise fans will know, will go on to have somewhat of a rivalry with Leon, helping him and challenging him as he's never sure what her ulterior motives are. In this new imagining of their character, Ada Wong is playing it up as an FBI agent there to bust the Umbrella Corporation for their role in the viral outbreak, but she needs Leon's help to do so. His willingness to help, as both a police officer and as someone who is clearly interested in Ada, is a really fun character trait. Whenever Leon starts really questioning anything, Ada plays up the "Leon, I need you" and starts batting those eyelashes at him, and suddenly he's dedicated to the cause once again. Claire Redfield and Leon's relationship, however, is a bit strange. Claire begins flirting with Leon just about as soon as they come into contact with one another, even though it is literally the worst context imaginable for flirting, quite possibly ever. Okay, so this is one of the biggest problems I have with the characterizations in the game, and I've seen a lot of these criticisms too, so it's definitely not just me. But there's a thing that happens in the game where the characters of Claire and Leon sort of flirt. Well, Claire is flirting with Leon is having none of it. And it's really awkward, and it doesn't fit the tone of the game or the circumstances, but it comes to a head very early on, but it's exacerbated by another problem. I'll take this opportunity to explain that I really didn't want to spend the entire review comparing the remake to the original game. I just want to compare it in some cases. In some areas, I definitely want to compare the games against one another, but not in every case. But in one of the biggest areas I have a problem with the game personally is the lack of character interaction. In the original Resident Evil 2, the characters of Claire and Leon met up a couple of times, not a terrible ton, but they met up enough, and it was like, oh hey, look, that's cool, here's this character, and wow, you know, it felt dynamic, and it felt like he's really here, or she's really here, depending on which character you're playing as, and it made it feel like you never really know what's around that next corner, or what's through that next door. Cue the Pawn Stars meme. But there's a scene early on in the game, and it's the last time you're going to meet Claire until the very end of the game. And this is, and if you're on the B scenario, this is the last time you meet the other character until the very end, and this is why I have such a big problem with it. And so I'm going to provide commentary on it a little. But a helicopter crashes into the Raccoon City Police Department, and the characters meet each other, but they are separated by a gate. One character is outside and the other character is inside. They're both technically within the confines of Raccoon Police Department, but one character is on the inside of the gate and the other character is on the outside, and they can't get through. And then after talking to each other for a few minutes, or a few seconds technically, the helicopter explodes dramatically, and all of the dormant zombies in the area then wake up. Now, I have a problem with this for a couple of reasons, which, I mean, I've already said I have a problem with this for a couple of reasons, but more specifically, this scene doesn't work for me for, well, specifically, I'd like to call out the Leon new game, Leon A scenario. It's the worst version of this scene, because honestly and ironically, the Claire A version of it isn't so bad, which is so, it really just, it gets in my head, and it's like, how is that possible? How do they make one that's kind of okay and one that's not? In the Leon A version, Claire flirts with Leon to a startling degree. In the Leon A version, the new game, Leon, when you first start the game and you pick Leon, Claire will be outside the gate, and Leon will be inside the gate. And so when all the zombies start waking up, they're going to make their way towards Claire. And Leon will say something like, hey Claire, you gotta get out of here. But then Claire says, I can take care of myself. And she then proceeds to stand there. I just wanna emphasize that. She says, I can take care of myself, after flirting with this guy, and then proceeds to stand there staring into his eyes longingly while zombies start walking towards her, and then Leon is like, no, hey Claire, yo, for real though, seriously, you have to get the fuck out of here. And only then is she's like, oh, okay, you're right, I'll go now. And then she turns around to leave, and it's like, it's the most bewildering thing ever, because it's like, I could take care of myself. It's like she's flirting with him, and then the zombies are coming, and Leon's like, hey, you gotta go. And then she's like, maybe not. And then Leon's like, what the fuck? Get out of here. But in the Claire A scenario, where she's on the inside of the game, Leon's on the outside, the zombies are coming, and he's just hanging around for a second also, and she's like, hey, you gotta get out of here. And he's like, yeah, okay. But then he lingers a little bit too, but it's not as dumb. It's not as dumb. He's not just staring longingly into her eyes. And then she's like, alright, you gotta go. And he's like, we're gonna make it. Well, I think, to be fair, in the Leon A scenario, she also says, like, oh, we're gonna make it out of this as well. But it's just a dumb scene, and it's just, the very first time I saw this, because I played Leon A, that was my first playthrough, it just, I could spend 20 minutes talking about this scene, and I really don't want to, so I'm going to stop now. But it is completely idiotic, and I have no idea what they were going for. But considering that's the last time these two characters interact, and it's a fucking total disaster of a scene, I mean, you don't even have to compare it to the original Resident Evil 2 to be disappointed. That's just a fucking terrible idea, no matter how you look at it. This game has one of the weirdest problems I've ever seen with a video game. Like the original Resident Evil 2, the remake features an A scenario which can be played with either Claire or Leon, and then a subsequent B scenario which can then be played with the other character. In my first playthrough, I played Leon A and then followed that with Claire B. In this game, they don't call it A and B, they call it like New Game, and then the second one is called Second Run, but everyone still calls it A and B, so just a quick correction there. That's the mistake I will also be making. In the original Resident Evil 2, this means that there were two scenarios in the game. Each character got to do something unique compared to the other. So instead of just play this game as Leon, then play through the same game again as Claire, you had similarities, but it diverged at some point and became their own unique adventure. As I mentioned before, by playing both the A scenario and B scenario, you got the larger picture of what really happened during the events of the game. So you saw what Leon was up to, and you get to see what Claire was up to. The problem with the remake is it got really, really lazy with that approach. You know how I just mentioned that by doing the A and B scenarios, you could get two separate adventures and not just have to play the same game again as two characters? Well, with the remake, that's exactly what happens. This is where everything gets complicated. This is where my reverence for the remake began to break down as I played it. I got about halfway through the Claire B playthrough before I started to really, really notice something wrong. Each of the scenarios rewrite the previous stories to fit the current scenario, and then ignore the fact that another scenario previously took place at all. So, what this means is that I played through the entire game as Leon first. I completed every puzzle, I found just about every item I could, I did just about everything I could, I finished the game, got to the credits and everything. And then I started another playthrough, the second run with Claire. This is your opportunity to see what Claire was up to while you were playing as Leon, the second half of the story. Whereas Leon had to actually get to the police station, Claire teleports there, which all second run characters do. So I felt a little deprived of more Raccoon City adventures. But, I mean, whatever, that's not that big of a deal, I guess. After this, nothing really changes. You will literally find notes written by Leon in areas that he's already completed, saying things like, hey, I've already been through here, shit's fucked, hope you're not dead, bye! But you get to the puzzle location, and it's not even solved. Like, you have to do the whole fucking thing. Did Leon scramble this before he left? What happened? It makes no sense that this happens, and at the very least, there should have been 2 sets of puzzles so that you can see that, oh yeah, Leon solved the chess piece key puzzle and this door is open, but now Claire has to solve the Cookie Monster number guessing game but with bombs puzzle, or something. But it gets so much worse. Characters that Leon will encounter and experience cutscenes of, Claire will see the exact same cutscenes of. The cutscenes won't always happen in the same way, though they end in the same way. Sometimes they diverge slightly, as each character obviously have their own animations and dialogue, but that's still a big problem. Leon came through here, fought William Birkin, and saw Annette Birkin die. But Claire came through here, also fought William Birkin, saw the exact same cutscene, but Annette Birkin died somewhere completely different. And no, it's not possible that they're both canon, because she assuredly died for real in both cutscenes. So the scenario you're playing is actively rewriting the story as if the previous run didn't even matter, which completely nullifies the idea of a second run entirely, in my opinion. Claire gets the antiviral agent for Sherry, fights Birkin on the way back to her, and watches Annette Birkin die before the next self-destruct sequence begins. But why does that happen? Because Leon retrieves the G-Virus sample, and then fights the very same Birkin battle, and watches Annette Birkin die. But during the timeline of the game, Claire has already watched Annette Birkin die because the base is starting to fall apart. It's just, The only game this actively reminded me of was Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, where if you actually listen to the post-game cassette tapes, you can listen to all of the plot holes, as each cassette contains conflicting information about how Zero got sick, how Skullface found Zero, etc., etc. Except I'm not listening to it, I'm watching it happen, and it's so unbelievably lazy I legitimately have no idea what to think here. I wanted to play a second run, or B scenario, because I wanted to see what Claire got up to after Leon finished his awful first day on the job. But Claire literally just played through everything Leon did, with very few exceptions, and enemy placement, Mr. X getting killed off halfway through the game, item placement, and weapon differences. It was very lazy, and quite honestly, it deeply impacted my enjoyment of the game, and my God's honest opinion that if they didn't have either the time or the budget to do 2 divergent scenarios like the original, they should have just done one long scenario where you switch between Leon and Claire at occasional points of the story. Because that active plot hole generator of a second run is just a mess.
You don't know what you're up against.
I was watching a video on YouTube fairly recently about Alien Isolation that felt so relevant to me while playing Resident Evil 2 Remake that I couldn't help but want to talk about some of it while I discuss one of my biggest issues with the game, Mr. X. In a video by AI and Games, Tommy Thompson says that the developers of Alien Isolation built the game around a simple premise. Survive an encounter with Ridley Scott's original Alien. Such a feat is pretty difficult to balance given that you need a strong story to carry the player through, but also to establish pacing as such that the tension varies throughout your gameplay. AI and Games. Which may very well be where my problem with Mr. X lies. It may also be an unfair comparison, as Resident Evil 2 Remake is no Alien Isolation. It seems wild to me that the Xenomorph fits the bill of what Mr. X is trying to do in Resident Evil 2 better than Mr. X. He stalks, he chases, he harasses, he cannot be killed. Unlike the Xenomorph though, you can easily run from Mr. X and hide from him. Just run to the safe room. Or stay out of his range long enough and go through any series of doors, and eventually he'll lose track of you and you could begin trying to complete whatever you were doing again. It's hard to imagine what must have been going through the minds of Umbrella as they were designing him. I mean, he's big, he can bust through walls, capable of crushing people to death with one hand, but cannot run. Just a brisk jog, which is actually fast enough to catch the player, but once he reaches them, he just continues his slow walk. At most, all Mr. X does is scare you the first couple of times you encounter him, but then he falls into the role of guy that pisses you off while you're trying to do this puzzle. Really though, I guess one of the biggest reasons I wanted to compare the Alien to Mr. X is that Alien Isolation is designed to give the player room to breathe when the tension rises too high. Mr. X, on the other hand, can be led in circles around the main hall for 25 minutes if you're really bored. Imagine toying with the alien like that. It would completely neutralize the tension and horror of such a creature. Mr. X, while a stubborn inconvenience, is more or less an artificial lengthening to your playtime as you have to run around the police station to get to where you're going. He just comes across as inconsequential more often than not. Going back to AI in games, which at this point is basically cheating, they reference a presentation from a Nuclei conference on Alien Isolation. I have looked for this myself but could not find it, so I'll just quote what is said in the AI in Games video. As explained by Andy Bray at his talk in the 2016 Nuclei conference, the player can't be scared shitless all of the time. Otherwise, they'll just give up. The tension had to vary, but also had to maintain an air of unpredictability in the xenomorph itself. AI in Games, Andy Bray. This quote, in my own personal opinion, sums up my issues with Mr. X just about perfectly. Andy Bray is talking about Alien Isolation with this quote and explaining what the developer's thought process was behind the design of the xenomorph. And so the final product gave us the ultimate hunter, a predator who was fucking terrifying, literally had eyes in the back of its head, was designed with two different systems so that one always knew where the player was but the alien didn't, and how that was able to be utilized to mess with the player, and how it also used systems to track when the player was too stressed out, and so it would take away the alien for a while. Mr. X has no such design philosophy. His AI just stomps and follows you, and if you get too close, he punches you. I think that due to the fact that he follows you constantly until the story takes him away from time to time, they decided away with any sort of insta-kill abilities, which may very well be a good thing, though I can't help but wonder if something was lost in the process. Here I am getting my brains eaten now all at once by plant zombies, but the actual tyrant himself can only give me a gentle haymaker that, at the very least, makes me rethink my life decisions. I cannot help but feel my heart racing when I hear him stomping through RPD and I don't know exactly where he is. Is he behind that door? Is he on the floor below me, above me? Am I about to run into him? And that's when he shines. Mr. X is at his best when you don't know where he is. Or, when you see him out of the corner of your eye across the darkness, shit, how did I not hear him? Fuck. But the magic goes away when he's chasing you down the hallway, because in the words of Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before and will happen again. It's not very interesting, it's not very exciting. Mr. X does not adapt, he does not evolve. That quote from AI in Games about the varying tension? Not with Mr. X. He's a one-stomp wonder. If only for one part of the game he ran, or did something new, or learned some kind of new trick, or maybe even threw his hat at Leon or Claire like fucking Oddjob from GoldenEye, that would have been interesting.
I'll probably get shit for this, honestly. I've been calling out Mr. X for not adapting and not changing, even though that's technically not true, because there's actually one part of the game where he breaks through a wall and jump scares the player. Now, this only happened to me during one playthrough, and it was during Leon A. I actually tried to get it to happen during other playthroughs by replicating what I did in the other ones, because I needed to record this for my video review, but I couldn't get it to happen again. So I'm not sure if I just did something wrong or it only happens in Leon A. But anyway, he jumps through the wall while he walks through the wall, and it startles you because that's something he's never done before, and it's like, oh wow, that's spooky. And this is where I'm probably going to get shit and people are going to be like, okay, come on. So I've been calling him out for not changing and not evolving, not adapting, not varying the tension, and then he does that. But unfortunately, here's the thing. So there's actually a similar scene to this in Resident Evil 7 where Jack Baker busts through the wall and surprises the player, and as Mr. X busts through the wall, I immediately started thinking like, oh, that's just that again. It's the same thing, a long, narrow hallway. You know, I'm not thinking about him. Mr. X hasn't been around for a while, which when Jack Baker busts through the wall, you haven't seen him for a little while either. And so it's kind of the same thing there. And so the jump scare wasn't really effective for me. I appreciate the game for trying something new, but it didn't work for me. I wish that it tried something a little different, because in this specific instance, this was the exact same trick that they've already done in a previous game, and it didn't work for me. And I know people are going to be like, that's a double standard, that's not cool, you can't ask for this and then be like, that's not good enough. And I appreciate it for what they tried to do, but it just, as it was happening, I was like, oh, it's just Jack Baker, and that might be on me more so than the game, which I accept, you know, but that's my feeling on it, and I just wanted to get this in here so that I didn't seem like a hypocrite for asking for something and then ignoring it the one time it does happen.
In fact, and I apologize for the fan fiction, but I have a theory on where Mr. X could have been best utilized for the ultimate jump scare. Later on in the game, when you're in the sewers and have moved on from the police station, you actually find a film roll that you can develop. There's an elevator that takes you right back to RPD, so it's not very far at all. At this point in the game, Mr. X isn't chasing you anymore, so there's nothing to worry about. The players make their way across the map to the now mostly empty RPD, of course, according to this fanfiction theory. They reflect on their journey and the sacrifices they've made. Snake Eater is probably playing somewhere just off screen. Maybe Claire or Leon say something poetic like, man, shit is so fucked, but then they finally make it to the dark room. They put the film reel in, develop the film, get the hiding places picture so they can go on their awesome new picture hunt side quest thing and find some new weapon upgrades, and as they walk into the save room, bam! Mr. X bursts through the wall with no forewarning and is just there now. This plays on a lot of interesting tropes for the game. 1, you're in the save room. That's completely off limits from baddies, but not anymore. 2, you thought Mr. X was gone, but he was only pretending. 3, you thought you knew all of Mr. X's tricks, but it turns out he was just waiting to change the game. The ultimate benefit here is to really shock the player and catch them off guard in their most private moment, in the safe room, with something they thought was probably stale or boring. By doing so, the player must now always be cautious because they never truly know when Mr. X is going to burst through that wall. And also, since the players are about to move on to Nest and the final portion of the game, the fact that this safe room wall has a gaping hole in it now is not that big of a deal. They probably won't be coming back here anyway. Now, Mr. X is a threat again because he's unpredictable. The tension has varied. You can never be sure. At least until speedrunners figure out that, nope, this is a one-time thing and you guys are all fine out in the other safe rooms. But yeah, there's nothing you can do about that. Ultimately, as I finish up my thoughts on Mr. X in this section, I will say that I was disappointed by him. He's the tyrant. Sure, he's not Nemesis. Nemesis will fucking run. Dude had a minigun and a rocket launcher. He even said stars all menacingly, and was an actual nightmare to deal with. But as far as nightmarishly powerful BOWs go, Mr. X is pretty low on the list for me.
It seems that Capcom is at least trying with Resident Evil again. After 7, and now this, it's a step in the right direction. They're back to understanding survival horror after so many years. I mean, Hunk and Tofu, free DLC, classic skins which are also free. My god, who are these people anymore? It's my honest to goodness belief that this was a lower budgeted experiment to see how well it would do, which explains the lack of a true B scenario, the rush to get players to the police station, and the lack of any significant Raccoon City sequences. It's satisfying to blow open a zombie's head. It feels right. It feels satisfying sneaking through RPD and evading them. It feels good creeping through and hearing their moans and screams coming from the darkness. They nailed how it should look and feel, and I'm completely surprised by that. Unfortunately, it's kind of rough around the edges, and unlike a lot of other critics, I'm not sure I'd call this game a masterpiece. I think right around the time the second playthrough started invalidating the first, the masterpiece qualification went out the window, at least for me, because I've still never seen a game retcon itself in the span of a second playthrough. They've also said that they would look into a Resident Evil 3 remake if the fans wanted enough. I think considering how well the remake has done that that's a given. I just hope to God that they don't treat Nemesis like Mr. X, and boy, I sure hope they actually polish the hell out of the game and not retcon the story as it plays out. It's not a bad game. It does so well in so many ways, but so poorly in so many others. I think that people should definitely buy it and play it, but my goodness does it have a lot of weird issues. It's more certainly not a faithful remake of Resident Evil 2, that is for certain. It's more of a reimagining than a remake. I quite enjoyed playing through this game. The gameplay is great. If you can overlook the issues with the storytelling and lack of faithful recreation of the original, this game is fantastic. Unfortunately for me, the story changing itself was a big issue for me, and that really took me out of the game quite a bit. This is the part of the game where everyone falls asleep in the trash compactor.
Sherry, I'm coming! Hold on, Sherry.
To make up for all of the awkward flirting and constant story retcons between scenarios, you have to wonder why the game started playing with the idea of an unreliable narrator. What was the point? The original is 20 years old by now and has spawned a legacy so much so that the remake has been a subject on the lips of fans for a decade, if not longer. But if you think about the strange inconsistencies, the awkward flirting between Claire and Leon, or the heroic Claire action shot, or the fact that Annette dies in 2 different ways, or how Mr. X dies in 2 different ways, I actually think there could have been a really fun way to end the remake. Instead of just pulling some unreliable narrator shit out of its ass for no reason other than to seem like they were too lazy to pad out the playtime for a Resident Evil 2 remake, how about when Leon, Sherry, and Claire are walking off into the sunset during the ending of the game, they drift off and off and off into the horizon, and then the camera pans back, and there's 3 people standing back where the other 3 used to be standing. And as the camera draws close, you can see that it's adult Sherry, an older Claire, and Leon. "Oh, really? Was I just surviving?" says Claire. For some reason she sounds like I'm doing a bad impersonation of Leon. "Oh yeah, leaning on the gate and everything. Real casual," Leon would joke. It'd turn out the awkward and ill-timed flirting on behalf of Claire was actually that of Leon's ego tugging the memory in a different direction, which explains the difference between Claire A and Leon A. Also, I'm really bad at these impressions. "Can't believe it's already been 20 years. All those people. Mom and Dad," Sherry would say, before getting a pat on the shoulder by Leon and Claire. The remake would be an opportunity to revisit the older characters once again and see what they're up to after seeing the classic story through their eyes. Maybe even a comment about remembering there being much more to the story, but that might draw too much attention to the lackluster B scenario in the game. After returning to the location where their old lives ended and their new lives began, they'd reminisce about the old times, pour one out for Marvin, making Umbrella pay, etc., etc. Then, Sherry would say, "And I never got my parrot." Bam! Credits. You've taken the issues of an inconsistent story, and instead of reworking a B scenario, all you've done is utilized a tiny bit of fanfiction to iron over any inconsistencies by bringing in the older characters and their faulty memory. A lifetime of fighting BOWs would do that to you. Honestly though, I don't think this would make it better, but you've got to keep in mind the story is in this state regardless. Introducing my dumb fanfiction is just the only way I can see to make light of that. The Resident Evil series characters age in real time along with the rest of us, so getting to see them again in our modern time, as well as a memorial to Raccoon City, would be a great deal of fan service, and also story progression. Because who the fuck knows when we'll actually see these characters again? Seriously, they're almost in their 50s by now. Come on Capcom, let's do it already. Leon's haircut ain't getting any younger.